Hello. No opening poem because I forgot that that's something I did until 2 seconds before switching the scene on OBS to the one with my face. So I'm Imogen, and we're talking about poetry today, and that's the beginning of stream. Uh, um, Hello, Nikki. Hello, Ray. How's it going? It's going good. How's it going for you? And by good, I mean uh, an opening poem in this economy. Yeah. How's it going? I finished doing the editing that I was talking about last stream for the Friends Poetry Collection, which is cool. I actually ended up finding like copy editing to be a very enjoyable thing. Uh, I think it's I mean, I read so much poetry that like doing copy editing for a collection is so incredibly easy because I don't even have to read the poem with any sort of uh, emotional depth or necessarily an immense amount of attention to like content or thematic material or tone or how I'm feeling. I can just like uh, really lock in and like check for things that are, non-grammatical or inconsistently punctuated. And so that was kind of nice. My friend definitely made me do a lot of work within a pretty short amount of time, so there's that. But yeah, very mechanical, and uh, mechanical is not always the most fun, but it is like something I can do. Especially when I do like the non-mechanical equivalent of that so often on stream. And maybe that's something I should maybe try to do more often, or I don't know, in some sense, market myself as an editor, edit people's collections, edit people's things. It also made me think about the fact that I still haven't published my own poetry collection. And I mean, that's fine. I have not even been writing for 3 years, right? Um, a poetry collection is sort of an undertaking, right? And I haven't had that long or that much experience, and my poetry is still changing. But it makes me think about how I often sort of do these things for other people, editing someone's collection, reading people's poems on stream, uh, things like that. And doing social media for my mom's art, for example, right? Uh, and that's actually why I've been thinking about posting more on my own social media. And I posted a poem on my Instagram yesterday. And then this morning I went and I scheduled 14 posts. So my Instagram will just post 4 times a week for the next 3.5 weeks, which is awesome. And I just don't have to think about it. And then during that time, I can write a bunch more poems and then repeat. And maybe people on the internet will find those. Probably not, right? The algorithm's a harsh thing, and actually succeeding on like social media or any online space is just very, very hard. But maybe. Um, on that note of collections, Nikki, you said you are working on a manuscript for another collection. And that is just awesome. That's super cool. And uh, I hope I hope that goes smoothly and quickly and well and is enjoyable and you don't burn out on it and all of the things that I hope all the things that can go well when working on a large project do go well. I'm sure it will be great, right? Gotta be like Chico Malone, more unwritten books than written books. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I already have multiple unwritten poetry collections. So I am there. No need to feed the cold golem of the algorithm. Right. I mean, it's sort of I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I stream on Twitch, and Twitch is not a platform to be discovered, right? Twitch is not really a good platform to grow as like a creator, as a person online, to like get myself in front of people, because it doesn't have it doesn't, sort of push content to people. Um, so if you want to get larger, or if you know, if you're spending time doing this like content stuff, usually that happens on other platforms. Uh, and like I think the algorithm and all of that and social media is really not like a great place for art and sharing art. I think it takes away a lot. Um, but at the same time, like, you know, uh, I guess like I want to be a poet, right? Or I want to be an artist, or maybe it's not a want and it's that I exist in these patterns of creating art and sharing it and I continually come back to sharing my art and trying to, get it in front of people and making it, right? And in the modern age, um, the only real way to do that, right, is through social media and online stuff, right? So, so that I must be an artist, right? Or at least I will always create art, and I've been sharing it now and sort of creating community around myself regarding that. So, um, the question is how to continue to do that and how to continue sort of bringing new people into that. And I think other social media is probably the way to do that, because the Twitch, I don't really have to think about going live on YouTube and Twitch. I don't really have to think about like what I'm doing on stream. It all goes very smoothly. I enjoy reading people's poetry, analysis, all of that, right? And I think that means it's probably time to like start posting things and trying to branch it out to other places. um, Posting my poetry on Instagram is the first thing, right? So who knows what else beyond that. I apparently had this channel on mute. What did I miss? You missed me wishing you the best of luck with your poetry manuscript and being very excited about that fact, and talking about the fact that I have not written a manuscript and a poetry collection, and how I've edited other people's collections and I've assembled a anthology of primarily other people's work, and don't actually have a collection of my own, and how that's sort of an interesting situation. Um, but I don't know. I wonder. I also wonder if the poetry collection is the ideal way to be sharing one's art in the modern day, right? Because the poetry collection, right, like physical books, I don't know. I mean, people still buy them. I still buy physical books, right? But um, is it just better to share art entirely on social media? I'm not sure. I don't know how to be an artist in the rapidly shifting modern era, uh, because, you know, I've only been doing this for a few years, and I don't think anyone really knows. So it's a matter of figuring it out. You only need like 50 to do a chapbook. I know. I definitely have enough poetry. Like I have enough poems that I could fill multiple books with poems. Now, there's the matter of whether I want to fill books with those poems, whether any of those poems make sense in like a larger artistic context as like a statement, as a piece, in the context of being with other poems, right? These are all things that I consider. And because I think I conceive of or conceptualize of a poetry collection of mine, I would want something on a theme. I would want something where the entire work is consistent and within one artistic vision. And that doesn't mean just like grabbing all the random stuff. See, like you say, I'm a grab all the shit I find decent from the last I don't know 3 years in self-published as anthology, and I think that's cool. Um, I don't think that's how I want to write, like publish my poetry and approach my art, because I just think I don't know, that's not how I think of it. Um, But that is what I'm doing now with Instagram, right? I have all these scheduled posts of like decent anything that's decent enough from recently that I can try to like post some things and share some of it. So that'll be good. Um Hello, Classics are Ace. Welcome. How are you? I want to have the physical book, a nice paper, color illustrations. Yeah, I mean, like having a thing in your hands. Like I absolutely can't deny like the beauty, right, of a book in your hands. A thing to hold, and I imagine a book of one's own art is a very special thing to have. And like you say, nice paper illustrations, that kind of stuff. That's all super cool. You're doing well. How am I? How am I? I am. I've answered this already in one way, and maybe that means I should answer it in a different way now. I'm a little bit sleepy. I woke up early, but that's because I've been trying to wake up earlier. So it wasn't any earlier than it has been for the last week. That being 5:30 a.m. I really love the morning. I like waking up, and I just feel like I can like do things as soon as I wake up if I wake up early. So I've been doing things all morning, scheduling a bunch of posts for my Instagram. Um, I made a reel for my mom's Instagram for her art because she's also an artist, right? Um, and yeah, it's been like a kind of a long week. I've been doing a lot of things, and I edited a poetry collection for a friend, and um, so it's been a lot. But now I'm like streaming, and stream is very chill generally, right? Um, I can usually, do this pretty easily. Um, so that's good, right? I was like I had this whole week of a bunch of stuff, and then I'm like, oh, I'm so excited for Monday, so I can just go live on Twitch, and that'll just be a normal day where nothing unexpected happens, which is good, right? That means like Twitch, as it continues to be something that I can just do that I don't have to think that much about, and I love not thinking. I love not feeling like I have free will. Because intellectually I don't. Um, and the more often that like I don't have to sit and like engage with or like find myself in a space where my brain is tricking me into thinking I have any capacity to act, the better it is, right? So whether that's being like comfortably at peace with my uh, sort of detachment or just doing something and not having to think, those are all good. Um, that's sort of the framework I've been in lately. A big hefty book, hardcover, something you can use for self-defense. Have the door half open with the book on top. Crushes the home invasion. Oh, I see it. It sits on top of the door as a trap. I think that's a lovely thing to use a book for. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you've written. It takes like a whole lot of poems to write a big book. It's kind of insane, right? Um, Especially when we consider the number of poems that don't go into a book whenever we're making something. So good luck, right? And I do hope you get to have that big, hefty, hardcover bound book. Um, Classics are Ace, Liam, right? We can read your poem today. I think that makes sense. Um, Perspective, perception, I think is what it is, unless there's another one. If you're down for that, perception, perspective. I like those words. I have like some fiction and poems, but a shit ton of essays. I know you have a shit ton of essays, right? I've read some of them. Uh, yeah, I think that's cool. That's the only one you have submitted. Cool. Are you interested in my reading of that poem on this here day on May 18th, 2026? Anno Domini. or common era. Um, for some reason, like my back and neck are kind of like sore and tired this morning. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's okay. Sure, let's do it. That's exciting. Um, yeah, let's just jump into poetry. I just want to read poetry. I like poetry. Um, and that will be fine. Perception perspective. As I read this poem, as I look into this poem, is there anything you would like me to focus on, think about, any sort of things you would like to say that might, we'll say, prepare my mind for what I'm going to read. Ideally, not explanation, but just any guiding thoughts, questions, things you're hoping to get out of sending your poem to someone somewhere on the internet to read and discuss. Any of those sort of any of those sort of things are welcome at this time, is what I'm trying to say. And we'll read the poem. A little crooked, are we? But we can be here. So I was like looking at one of my VODs and I thought the lighting was just terrible, honestly, um, on like the actual poem. And I'm like, wow, it's bad. I should also probably like wipe off my screen more often. I noticed lots of like glare and things. Hold on. I'm gonna do that. Okay. Do we think, y'all who are watching, this lighting or like does more light from this lamp help the screen or make it worse? Because while I'm actually streaming, it's very hard for me to tell. I didn't want to say, be the one to say it, but yeah, clean that tablet. Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm fine with, like, here's the thing. Like, when I'm streaming, uh, I am just streaming. I am, like, not paying attention to most of the other stuff because I'm focused on, like, this. It's better with less glare. Okay. Good to know. And y'all saying things like, "Oh, fucking clean the screen." Um, that helps the stream go better. That helps my stream be better, right? Um, and if the stream is better, that's better because then like probably to some extent it'll be more enjoyable for people, or the passerby who comes into chat will be like, if someone sees that it's like awful quality and the iPad is grimy and shit, then like they'll be like, okay, this is like not pleasant to watch. And if more people show up, then there's more people who want to like maybe send me their poems, and that's a good thing, right? More poems, more variety. So I'm not going to be bothered if you call me out that my iPad is like dirty as fuck. So that's better, right? Like I can't really tell like, yeah, like I see my stream on my computer as like a 2-inch size little video, because if it's any bigger it distracts me. So I really don't get to know, you know this is angled funny. That's there we go. Perception perspective. This here. Yeah, and like obviously it's fundamentally jank because I'm using a camera and pointing it at another screen. So sort of just how it goes. That's good. Okay. Cool. Perception perspective. And I'm going to move this again so it's closer to me. It's going to mess up everything again. Okay. You said the classics are ace. I'll just let you interpret it yourself, and then I can answer questions about it afterward. Perfect. Sounds good. I can get behind that. So, this is Perception Perspective by Liam, by Classics or Ace. Thank you so much for submitting this, and we'll dive right into it. I have been gifted with spiritual inspiration, a new lease, a new chapter rewritten from moments in the past which I thought I understood. You are now here to heal the scars that I carry whilst others look away and wander. Some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. What will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through this new perspective of love and courtship? Time will tell. Perception perspective. Simple, short. Also, I have to say, just in general, like seeing you post your poems for the past few weeks, month, whatever, however long it's been since you basically like started writing poetry, you've been improving like so much. I just feel like it seems like you're getting like closer and closer every time you post to like your voice, and that's really awesome. And I think that's super cool to see. And I'm going to read this poem again. It's short, but that means we can read it multiple times and really try to, understand it, get the vibes, and feel what's going on. And then we'll start analyzing, talking, scribbling all over it, etc. Perception perspective. I have been gifted with spiritual inspiration, a new lease, a new chapter, rewritten from the moments in the past which I thought I understood. You are now here to heal the scars that I carry, whilst others look away and wander. Some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. What will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through this new perspective of love and courtship? Time will tell. So the first thing that like jumps off the page at me, and it's often the first thing that jumps off the page because it's sort of the surface level, is some of these techniques you're using, particularly, right, your alliteration. And it's really established, right? Because it's in our first line, it's in our last line, and it happens like all throughout the middle. This time will tell, perception, perspective. We have this, not so much in the first stanza, I guess, but as we go on later, we get this loved and laughed and lost and look, right? We get this, what will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through, right? Time will tell. Even a new lease, a new chapter, it's sort of alliterative, right? Whenever we repeat things, we are sort of naturally alliterating, even though I think we would call it repetition, right? And there's some other sounds going on too, right? Gifted with spiritual inspiration. So we have this sort of sound going on, this assonant quality throughout the opening, rewritten as well, right? A new lease, a new chapter rewritten from moments in the past. So we have this like past and chapter being a slant rhyme, which is super cool. The past, which I thought I understood. I have been gifted with spiritual inspiration, a new lease, a new chapter rewritten from the moments in the past, which I thought I understood. And this is nice, right? This stanza pushes and then it kind of pulls back a little bit at the end. It gives us sort of this like proclamation at the start. I have been gifted with spiritual inspiration. I think that's a nice opening line in general, right? It like says something sort of declarative, which, many poets sort of gravitate toward this way of opening a poem. But it's like vague enough. It's vague enough that it gets us wanting to read, gets us wanting to continue. I've been gifted with spiritual inspiration, and it plants a question in our head. Like, what? Spiritual inspiration. What does this look like? Tell me more. Keep going. A new lease, a new chapter, rewritten from the moments in the past, so we sort of elaborate, which I thought I understood. So really this whole thing acts in that way, to declare, to reiterate the nature of this inspiration. And then, we'll go forward, and perhaps some of this will continue to contextualize what's going on, right? And I think that's nice, right? Like the start of a poem is a great time to be vague, because if you start your reader off interested, intrigued, but a little confused, it's likely that they'll want to keep reading at least a couple more stanzas to, try to figure out what you're talking about, to try to understand. And I think that works nicely here in that way. Plus the fact that it's called like perception, perspective, and we don't exactly address these ideas immediately. At the end, we sort of tie into our title, right? Which I thought I understood. So we have this notion that we're creating of a changed perspective, right? And that maybe makes sense if we've been gifted with spiritual inspiration, if we have this new change in ourselves, right? We might have a new perspective. So it's giving us enough, right, in its vagueness. I'm a fan of purposeful ambiguity in poetry. Yeah, and so am I. I think it works very, very well. Ambiguity can be used in so many ways, right? And we have this, this lovely interplay, right, between specificity, and ambiguity, right? And neither of these one things is more right or wrong than the other, right? I encourage anyone who writes very ambiguous poems to switch and write very specific, very, clear poems, because both of these things can be really, really good. There's no right or wrong way to write poetry. But particularly, right, they can be very good when we use them sort of with intention, or we use them in a way that is, effective for communicating the ideas we want to say. That in some way, grab our readers' hearts or whatever. So do we do that here? Right? We'll see. But it's a good start. You, right? So we introduce a new person at the beginning of this stanza, you. And I think this, it doesn't seem on face value maybe that this is like tying in with our previous stanza, right? We have this very sudden shift. We go from I have been gifted with this thing, it's about me, it's about the moments of my past, my understanding, and then we have you. And I think what's really nice here, what's cool, is that, looking into our title again, this is sort of a change in perspective. I mean, we're still technically writing from the same perspective of I, right? But now we are sort of shifting to another person. So you are now here to heal the scars I carry. And I think this is where we start to maybe understand more about this spiritual inspiration. It's almost certainly somehow connected to you. Just the fact that we go from this one thing in the past to this new thing, a new chapter, you, kind of connects these things through the fact that they're like next to each other, adjacent in writing. You are now here to heal the scars I carry, right? The scars I carry, moments of the past. This makes sense. Healing, new chapter. So we're growing, we're moving forward. I think this all makes sense, right? Whilst others look away and wander. The scars that I carry, whilst others look away and wander. Some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. You are now here to heal the scars that I carry, whilst others look away and wander. Some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. So again, we're like reinforcing this idea of moving forward, right? Looking away, wandering, carrying things from the past, people who were once in your life and are now maybe gone, now maybe lost, right? Loved, past tense, laughed, past tense, are now lost, they're now gone. So it's creating a nice narrative, I think, that maybe not a narrative, but we're sort of setting up in the first stanza this notion of moving forward, this notion of moving on, and then now we're elaborating on it. What will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Right? So we have, and maybe another way to look at some of this is that we have this nice intertwining of like past and future and present, right? Where this stuff, these first two stanzas, have been like in the past and the present, right? I have been gifted with this thing, a new lease, a new chapter, rewritten from moments in the past which I thought I understood. So this is sort of present, but it's concerning the past. You are now here to heal the scars that I carry, whilst others look away and wander. Some I've loved and laughed with, right? So we have some of the past, again, present and past. But then we have another shift, right? A different sort of perspective shift going on as we go into stanza 3. And it's what will I next whisper, right? So in the first one, it's sort of me in this past, and then we change because we bring in you, we change, we bring in the future. And I think this is nice, right? It allows us to continue developing, even though we're sort of staying on the same theme of just like, something new, moving on, moving forward. Like, it's funny because we're not necessarily moving forward in terms of the content of the poem, right? We're sort of talking about very similar things, the way people move on, how the past gets recontextualized, how we change. But sort of the way that we're telling each of these things is subtly different, and I think that's nice. What will I whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through this new perspective of love and courtship? Right, and I think this last line maybe helps us understand you and I and spiritual inspiration, scars of the past, right? Loving in the past. We have some new sort of romance, whether literal or metaphorical. And I think the reality is that, like, we can't necessarily know, right? We don't have these details about the lover, right? Or even if there is a lover, or if it's love in some ambiguous sense, if it's courting an idea or a person, right? But, right, it leaves it nicely, openly ambiguous, right? I think a lot of people could place, a variety of experiences onto this poem, and it's certainly one way to write poetry, right? One thing we can do is write things that are hyper-specific, and usually this places the poem within like our experience, right? When it's specific, when it's talking about certain events and actions and very concrete things and our experiences, right? This sort of places the poem within us. And the reader sort of watches that almost passively in a sense. But when we write something that is vague, right, we're leaving our page somewhat blank, so to speak, right? When I write a poem that is very vague, it gives the reader space to sort of interpret it more freely, to insert their own experiences, resonate with that poem in their own way. And I think that's super cool, right? And that can be useful sometimes. That can also work against us sometimes. That, of course, depends on if you want to write something that really captures your experience, right? Um, or if you want to write something that captures a feeling and an idea and something that others can place their literal, actionable experiences on. But I think it's, it works here, right? Time will tell. So we have this other, like, sort of motion into the future. Um, need water. My mouth is, like, unhappy. I think this poem being, titled Perception Perspective is nice. It's interesting. Um, and it's consistent, maybe in some capacity, with the way that the poem is written, with the way that it has this sort of um, very abstract feeling to it. Abstract is maybe another way to put ambiguous, though not always, right? Abstraction is more the level of ideas, and we can have very specific ideas. Um, but this poem that is kind of abstract and ambiguous, to title it Perception Perspective, maybe in this way to invite the reader to look, invite the reader to um, have their perspective on the work, to think about it in that way, I think is cool, right? Funnily enough, I was chatting with someone yesterday about how difficult it often is to come up with titles. Yeah, titles are very hard. Did you have a difficult time with this particular title? Classics. Um, I like this title sort of in a vacuum, right? This title is alliterative, which sometimes alliterative titles don't work, but the alliteration here sort of matches the rest of the poem, right? Time will tell. Perception, perspective. They feel like nicely linked. So it connects to the poem in a very consistent way. And then I think the slash is just sort of a cool way to write a title, right? Because we can sort of read this as like two separate titles, that this poem can be read as perception on its own, that this poem can be read as perspective on its own, or maybe the title is to suggest, right, that this poem is about the intersections of perception and perspective. And maybe that's a way we could look at this poem as a reader, right? We could look at this as a poem about perception. We could look at this as a poem about perspective, which is, I think, the way I already read it, right? These different past, present, future, the feeling of change, the feeling of shifting and perspectives gradually changing, and, time will tell, maybe makes sense. Perception is interesting because this poem isn't particularly in content perceptual, right? And maybe I think of perception as those sort of like five senses type writing, right? Sense. Wow. Let me write that correctly. Senses. Okay. The five senses, right? That's sort of our perception. That's our sound, taste, touch, vision. Um, where, and we even mention, right, perspective in this poem, though we don't necessarily mention perception. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about here, is like how the notion of perception fits into this poem, or what placing perception in the title changes about this poem. Because I think this poem could be titled Perspective, and it would still fit nicely with all of these things. But this poem isn't titled Perspective, right? It's titled Perception slash Perspective. And that's interesting. Um, da, 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 da. Funnily enough, oh, I read that. Kind of. My titles tend to be simplistic. You struggled a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I mean, a simplistic, I mean, I feel like most titles are simplistic, right? Um, like sometimes I'll write a title that's like a sentence, and that's maybe like a not simplistic title, but I don't think that's like a bad thing for poetry, right? To have a simple short title. I often like to make my titles be reflective so the readers get a little aha moment when they realize the meaning. Yeah, I think that's nice too, right? Ever come out with a fire title and go, hell yeah, I gotta write something for it? Yeah, I mean, I definitely do that with lines, right? Um, with lines, I'll come up with a really good line, and I'll be like, oh, I want a poem around this. Um, I almost always title my poems after, so not so much that. Sometimes the line turns into the title, though. The care and feeding of a simple crane started out as a title. That's a cool title. pre pre perception post pre perception slash post perspective. Are you suggesting that as a title, or um sort of just that that's, I don't know. Pre perception, post perspective. I mean, we have like perception as before, right? Perception before, perspective after, right? And maybe that's sort of the dynamic happening here, right? We perceive, we experience, things change, we experience change, and then this gives us, right, a new way of seeing. And that's sort of how, like, that's kind of how the mind works, right? We go experience things in our lives. We like think about new things because of that, and then that fundamentally changes the way we see. And then we go and continue to perceive with our new brain, our new model of perceiving. And then that continues to iterate and give us new perspectives, which, right, makes sense for this poem. I've been gifted with spiritual inspiration. And perhaps this is, I have a new perspective, a new lease, a new chapter rewritten from moments of the past, right? Our old perceptions, which I thought I understood. But I don't, because I have a new perspective. You are now here to heal the scars that I carry, right? A perception, something present, the moment. Whilst others look away and wander, some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. A change in perspective on those people and those relationships. What will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through this new perspective of love and courtship? Time will tell. Right? And time will tell. Sort of perceiving again, continuing to experience is the only way to know if something will last. We can never know if something sort of will continue into the future. Anything is subject to end and sort of shatter our perspectives, our perceptions, our existence. So um, I think this poem is, that time will tell, right, is doing a lot of work here, and especially being so sonically connected to perception, perspective, sort of returns us to the core notion of this poem, right? And maybe that's the core notion. Maybe it is for me, right? Um, because I'll make anything about impermanence and philosophy of mind. I'm like I'm like salivating a lot today, and it's very unpleasant because I'm trying to speak and I keep having like all this spit in my mouth. I find that really unpleasant. It's such a not needed thing to say, but yeah. um, Pavlov moment. I don't really know what Pavlov talks about. Pavlov is like when you like incentivize someone, right? Like you give them a little treat and then they associate you with good things, right? I must say your analysis of the poem is making me think more deeply about it than when I wrote it. Uh, that's all that I hope to do, right? All I hope is that I show people that you can think deeply about poetry, that you can recontextualize, have new perspectives, right, on the things you thought you knew, that you can look at something deeply, and maybe the more time we spend with something, the more value and understanding we can get from it, right? Um, that's all. That's all I really, you know, like if there was one thing I want people to learn from stream, right, it's this notion of like critical thought and like spending time to understand things. Like that's all it is. Um I think this poem is neat cuz it is sort of a love poem, right? Uh we're talking about this new perspective of love and courtship, this time will tell. But it's not like it's extraordinarily neutral. Um like this is something I feel about this poem. It's very neutral, and that's not necessarily bad. It's very steady, right? Is sort of how it feels. And maybe it's this like lack of strong verse, right? This sort of continued use of sound throughout in a similar way that, doesn't necessarily land anywhere too strongly in particular, right? Even our ending, our time will tell, sort of leaves this open to continuing, right? And then this gifted with spiritual inspiration, like opens with ambiguity. Um, and oh, I bumped my oh, I bumped my volume. I thought I bumped my gain, and that would have been bad. So this poem like comes off as incredibly neutral, incredibly steady, right? I have been gifted with spiritual inspiration, a new lease, a new chapter, rewritten from the moments in the past, which I thought I understood. Right, and that's interesting because we start with this thing that's like very like important, maybe spiritual inspiration. It's like whoa, spiritual inspiration, um, but then it sort of redirects us to these moments in the past which we thought we understood, and this almost has, I think, like a slightly a softer, more reflective feel, right? It doesn't like inspiration, I think, is this really like beautiful looking forward kind of thing. And I think that maybe calls to these angels and these whispers. Um, but then, like, you are now here to heal the scars that I carry, right? And this is like a very good thing, but we're framing this person, this inspiration, this beautiful thing, this you, whatever it is, within the negative, right? Within the scars that I carry, right? And within the fact that, they're here now, but that comes with the understanding that others have gone away, right? Others have wandered. Love has been lost, so I can have this love now. Laughter cannot continue. Um, with others, but I have this thing now, right? Some are lost and vacant and will not return, but you're here, right? You are now here. These are all not here. Um, and that's sort of fascinating, right? Because it gives it this more, I mean, like somber feeling, but it like the poem isn't somber, because the poem is, I think, relatively positive in what it's saying. So it kind of, balances out, right? Um, what will I next whisper? And then this last section is just sort of like, again, speculative and uncertain. What will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through this new perspective of love and courtship? Right? Like, will they? It's uncertain. Right? What will I even whisper? What will I say? What will happen? Time will tell. There's sort of just like a comfortable, it's just like relaxed. In a sense. I think that's not the right word. Um, but there's maybe just this acceptance sort of baked into this poem that like things are lost. I go forward. New things will be experienced. um, and this is sort of inspiring, but also like it may end and time will tell, and I just have to like see what happens. And I think that's a very beautiful way to frame life, is to say that you just sort of have to go through it. You have to do it. Time will tell what will happen. Um, and it will, right? The thing with time will tell is, sure, it says that like I don't get to know now, but there is this absolute certainty in our lives. I think this statement is kind of underratedly beautiful, right? Time will tell, right, has so much certainty to it. No matter what we do, no matter what happens in our lives, time will tell, right? As we go forward, as we move on, um, we will know, right? We will be given by the world, these like new moments, these new experiences that will continue to recontextualize, that will continue to push us in new directions. Um, and all we have to do is sort of to perceive, right? To be, to continue. And then that will, continually change the way we see the past. We're sort of this thing that like continually looks back on its history, um, based on a present, continually isolates itself from what once was, and I don't know, is always moving into the future. Um, and that's beautiful, right? There's a sort of confidence in this poem. There's uncertainty, but it doesn't feel bad, you know. Um, I think that's a fascinating thing to do in a poem. And I mean, I read it that way. It doesn't have to be read that way. Perhaps others read this poem as intensely passionate, and that's as right as my reading, right? but but to me it doesn't have like burning intensity that some poets write with. And that makes it to me like unique. It this definitely stands out to me, because it's such a contrast from a lot of poems that are read that are very strongly emotional in one way or another, with these like passionate poetic loves or rage or whatever. Um, to write something that is neutral, especially something that is neutral within the context of love, I think is like a special skill. Is a very uncommon skill within poetry. Because a lot of people gravitate toward poetry for things like confession, for things like venting, for things like speaking out against the things they are angry at, for protest, for the deepest and truest radical expression of their soul. Um, and maybe this is a deep and true radical expression of the soul. It's just a soul that, speaks differently. And I think that's cool. Um, so yeah, um, I'm a big fan of that. Angel, spiritual inspiration. I like how this poem like remains connected throughout, right? A lot of these a lot of these lines sort of jump across stanzas, which is something I like to see. Like I personally like to see in a poem a lot, where there's something up here that sort of reminds us of something down here, and like the end points back to the title, and the title is pointing to all these different spots in the poem. I think I like that sort of harmony, that intertwining of things. So, now might be a decent time if there are any questions or comments about the poem, um, or thoughts, right? For anyone who has them to voice those things. Nice poem. I like it. Yeah. Um, I also like it, but I think I've liked 99% of the things sent to me on stream. I'm not very picky about poetry. A short one, yeah, it is pretty short. Um, yeah, I wonder. Classics. I don't know if I should call you classics or Ace or Liam. It's always a hard thing to decide, you know. But if you have any questions or thoughts or context around this poem that you would like to share, or what you were trying to go for, you can share that stuff, or you can keep it to yourself, or any other questions you can ask, or if there are things you're trying to like improve on as a poet, we can talk about that stuff too. um, or things that you personally don't like about your own poem, or things you like. um, those are all directions to take. When you find a poem by a poet you like and it sucks, yeah, I mean that it doesn't suck. It's just that you don't like it, Ray. I went into it thinking about friendships, old and new. Yeah, and I think you definitely you definitely capture that notion, right? That things are lost, that new things happen, um, and I think it's written well in the sense that this is a experience that is inevitable, so it happens. It's sort of, it must happen. There's no way around it. And there are good things about it and there are bad things about it. And this poem sort of hits the balance between those things. Um, I would also be interested, you know, to see how you wrote a poem that was really dug into like probably the like this line like some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. Like that's a very powerful line. The idea that someone who is close to you is now lost and vacant. I think it would be interesting to see a poem from you that like expanded on that one particular thing, right? That because that's very tragic. That's very painful, right? That someone is lost in that way. I think it'd be interesting to see a poem from you that's really maybe uh, digs into like the passionately negative side of losing a friend, and like the passionately positive side. And you have some of that, right? Gifted with spiritual inspiration, but the intense beauty of like a new friendship and a new connection, right? And maybe those could coexist in another poem rather than something that um, you know, is very neutral, something that really goes back and forth between like uh, extremes of emotion. Um, it'd be cool to see that range, just as a way to challenge yourself, right? Um, I will always challenge someone to write something very unlike the thing that they've just showed me, because I think that's a great way for us to grow. It's a great way for us to have new perspectives on things if we, you know, basically try to see the world in a way opposite from what we've seen before. Um, that can work very well. um, I like it as a straightforward little punchy piece. Yeah, it does have some punch. It does have some things to think about, uh, some lines that get us pondering, some some good moments, right? Pablo de Roca is a poet I love, but holy shit, his Marxist poems are hard to read without rolling the eyes at every line. Yeah, and that's okay, right? Um, that even within one poet, maybe one poet who we like a lot, they have many different things, different ways they might write, and um, it's that's fine, right? um, yeah, I have the issue. I don't think it's an issue. I mean, I've essentially cultivated this mindset where there isn't really poetry that I don't like. um, I just try to take every poem as is. Some of Sylvia's Plath stuff is really hard to read. Interesting. It does have a nice punch. Yeah, punch. Um, do I have much else to say? I'm obviously pretty like low energy, neutral today on stream. I mean, maybe it's not obvious. Maybe I always seem the same. I'm not sure. Um, this whole thing with me talking and my mouth having moisture is really annoying though. Short stream today since you're a sleepyhead? I mean, maybe. We could start, like, if there's not anything else to talk about this one, I could just yap, maybe, right? I added the original Spanish to mine because it sounds way better in Spanish. Yeah, language, right, matters a lot. Some things sound vastly better in one language or another. Um, I guess that's kind of it for this poem. A short little one. Um, just 16 little lines, right? And things can be short. I like things that are short. I mean, I write poetry a lot that's very short. None of my poetry usually goes beyond more than a page unless I write it on the bus. Um, and I think it's nice. If that's all, if there are no other questions um, from you, Liam, or thoughts, then I will read it again, right? I will say thank you for submitting it and sharing your lovely work. I'm so glad that you've kept writing um, and that you're like posting your stuff and sharing your stuff. Um, and yeah, I mean, I just can't wait to read more. Perception perspective. I have been gifted with spiritual inspiration, a new lease, a new chapter, rewritten from moments in the past, which I thought I understood. You are now here to heal the scars that I carry, whilst others look away and wander. Some I've loved and laughed with are now lost in their vacancy. What will I next whisper to the world and its angels? Will they guide me through this new perspective of love and courtship? Time will tell. Perception Perspective by the Classics Are Ace. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for submitting. It is always appreciated, and um, I love reading poetry, and I love reading people's poetry. So, y'all just continually feed me things to read, and I think that's nice. Should I just end stream? Should I just like acknowledge the fact that I'm tired? Probably, right? Um, I don't really. Yeah, I don't think I want to read another poem. Uh, I couldn't turn my brain off unless I tried. Uh, yeah, I feel like. How early you woke up today? I woke up at 5:30 a.m. You need a really really pricey redeem of tell Jenny to take a nap. Yeah, I can nap live on stream. um, I just be one of those people who sleeps on stream. Uh, I've had the thought of just like streaming like anytime I'm doing anything artistic. Just like anytime I'm playing saxophone, just going live and like playing saxophone, improvising, whatever, writing, I think that's probably not a great way to live. I don't know if that would be, I think that would be bad. It's sort of interesting though, like this notion of you can sort of put anything on camera and make content out of it. It's very terrifying. I think there's a lot of art that can be made about that. Um, I think it would be really interesting to have a long term series of live streams that act as a sort of like meta narrative. Um, like, this is really hard to explain, but like somehow having a stream that is doing some action, doing something, and it is then like as masquerading as that thing and somehow intended to be like some larger art piece where like it gradually shifts and it's like somehow a large big high concept. I don't know. I've been thinking, it's like I think about this, the notion of a live streamed work of art that unfolds over the course of many live streams. I'm not sure how that would happen though. And I'm not good at the big high concept art because I like writing short little poems. Thank you for reading these poems and talking in depth about them. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for stopping by and welcome, Messier. Um, yeah, I do it a lot. I think I read poems 3 times on stream. 3 times a week. 3 times. 3 times a week on stream, usually. And I don't know, maybe more soon. But yeah, I just love talking about poetry and reading them. Uh, so I put a camera on it. And thank you for watching it. And I think there are very few people. I mean, I think there are a number of people who are interested in that kind of thing, but I think it's a very rare thing to sort of be, we'll say, interested in like the deep artistic aspects of a piece of writing. um, and I think it's a lovely thing that there are people out there who are equally, maybe not equally, but like interested in the same way in these things that I like. There's dozens of us, dozens, right? um, really found a niche. um, you can do a manuscript organizing stream. I mean, that's presuming that I'm organizing a manuscript anytime soon, Nikki. Uh, I could stream copy editing other people's manuscripts. um, I would totally have people just like pay me to edit their poetry books. I feel like I that would be a perfectly reasonable way um, to like make money is just be a poetry editor. It would be cool. It would be cool to be an editor at one of like the literary magazines at one of the journals. That'd be really kind of neat, right? Um, and because I could just read poetry all day. It's very cool. I've recently wanted to explore poetry more, but it's kind of daunting when given Robert Frost and Edgar Allan Poe as understanding the classics. Yeah, right. The classics are well, the classics are ace. Sorry, um, the classics are well. Here's what I'll say. Edgar Allan Poe, yes, classic. Robert Frost, classic. And I think both of them are great poets. I really enjoy reading their work. But there are so many classics, and there are so many well established poets and poems, right? And I think this is a really, anyone who maybe tells or suggests you to start with like these two poets probably isn't giving you like the best advice. I think it's more important to like start by exploring and looking for things that you like because poetry is so vast and varied, right? I have this shelf of poetry books for me, and maybe I'll read you like a few different things that are all considered classics, right? And maybe we'll start with a haiku by Basho, right? Japanese haiku poet. Um, as the clouds drift apart, for now, friend, we separate. Wild geese living, leave. Right, that's the whole poem. That's a haiku. And some people might really dig that. And some people might be like, that's dumb. And if you really dig that, you start with like short, haiku or tanka or whatever. Maybe there's like Bukowski, absolutely a classic poet, but very, very different. You know, Here's Bukowski's The Poetry. We'll do something even more Bukowski. I'm gonna read some of The Shower. I won't read all of The Shower because um, TOS. We like to shower afterwards. I like the water hotter than she, and her face is always soft and peaceful, and she'll wash me first. Spread the soap over my balls, lift the balls, squeeze them, etc., etc. That's Charles Bukowski, and he's considered a classic, right? Um, that's very, very different from Basho, right? We can take Baudelaire, this old dead French guy, right? These are all old dead guys. Um, and Baudelaire writes like, you know, super differently. Um, I don't know which one to do. Hymn to Beauty. Do you come from heaven or rise from the abyss? Beauty, your gaze, divine and infernal, pours out confusedly benevolence and crime, and one may for that compare you to wine. Right, so now we're like rhyming, we're just talking about like beautiful, passionate love and stuff, right? Another classic, Maya Angelou, right? Gonna be entirely different from either of those. Um, Here's a poem called Working White Liberals. um, I don't ask the Foreign Legion or anyone to win my freedom or to fight my battle better than I can. Though there's one thing that I cry for, I believe enough to die for, that is every man's responsibility to man. I'm afraid they'll have to prove first, that they'll watch the black man move first, then follow him with faith to kingdom come. This rocky road is not paved for us, so I'll believe in liberals' aid for us when I see a white man load a black man's gun. Right? So, like, those are four poets who are considered famous, classics, respected. No one would really maybe um, I mean, someone might judge you for liking Bukowski. Yeah, you love that last one? All right. Um, Yeah. Okay, so that was a political poem, right? Um, so that was Maya Angelou. Since we're getting you on some poetry, Maya Angelou, right? She's a badass. She is. I don't think she's alive. Does anyone know if Maya Angelou is still alive? I don't think she is. I think maybe Toni Morrison is still alive. I have a whole collection of Maya Angelou, but you can just look her up and find it all online. Thank you for the raid, Liza Rise Up. We are talking about getting into poetry and how one might get into poetry when there are so many things to read and a lot of classics and maybe famous things aren't entirely, appealing to everyone. She died in 2014. Sad. Also, I love haiku too. I forgot the author, but he wrote "Mosquito buzzing in my ear. Do you think I am deaf?" That's awesome. I don't know who wrote that. If you liked Maya Angelou and you like haiku, I'll be back in a sec. I have to get the book. Um, there's Sonia Sanchez. So she's going to have the same sort of like empowering political feel, right? That Maya Angelou writes with, but Sonia also writes a lot of sonnets. She also writes a lot of poems with unconventional sort of form, right? So this one, she was one of the big popularizers of like breaking up words in this way that you see from a lot of modern Black poets. Um, so she was super innovative. But if we go to 14, let's do haiku for Toni Morrison, 379. Right. So she wrote a lot of haiku. Here are 15 haiku for Toni Morrison, another great author. Um, we know so little about migrations of souls crossing oceans, seas of longing, right? Etc., etc. And she writes haiku in a very, oftentimes, like very modern way. This might be very blurry. I'm trying to get it to work, but in the beginning, there was we and they and others, too mournful to be named. And I don't know if you can see, but was is spelled W-U-Z here. Um, so yeah, you might like Sonia Sanchez a lot. Yeah, you can't. Camera's not focused. But Sonia's super cool. Definitely check out Toni Morrison. And these are like modern classics, right? These aren't like, um, you know, super old, um, sort of like 17th century or 18th century writers, but also like, just because something is old doesn't mean you have to like it. Just because something is great doesn't mean you have to like it. And I think it's good to start by reading poets who are respected, but there are respected poets who are alive, right? There are respected famous poets who are living classics. Um, and it's no better or worse to read uh who did you say, Edgar Allan Poe, versus reading a living great, let's say Louise Gluck, right? She's still alive, I think. um I'm pretty sure she's alive. Yeah. How's your stream been today? Have you been giving people recommendations for the full hour and 20 minutes? No, we read a poem by the classics are Ace. And that one didn't take very long. And I was sort of gonna like wrap up stream, and then we got into this conversation about, you know, where to start reading poetry and how to sort of get into that. But it can also be very hard. Uh, 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 what was your username? Messier? um, Messier to like find poetry, right? There's a lot of it. There's a lot of, you don't necessarily want to be like buying whole books of poetry that you might not be interested in, might never read. But the good thing is you can find a lot of it online. And honestly, like looking up something you like looking up, I don't know what you're into. Maybe you're really into politics and political work. So you look up like best political poems, best modern political poems, best Middle Eastern political poems, if you want to go as far as being like region specific, right? Or maybe you really like sports and you're like, I'm going to look up poetry about sports because there is poetry about, people write poetry about everything. Maybe you really like Greek myths and stuff, you know, those are written as poetry. So you go maybe read those originals, and that's certainly reading classics and greats. Maybe you really dig, I don't know what people dig. You dig love and romance, right? And you want to find, you know, but I would say my recommendation is someone getting into poetry, getting into reading and writing, particularly into reading here, is to start with the things you're interested in, to start with your own preferences, or to find one poem or author you like. Like you really liked the Maya Angelou one. So go explore more of her work. Ask what it is, right, about Maya Angelou that you like, and try to find people that capture that same thing, who have that same feel, that same energy. That's a good approach, right? I've mainly been reading works by contemporary poets on Instagram and Substack. Yeah, and like that's valid, right? It doesn't have to be poetry books or literary magazines or well-known stuff. It can also just be like your explore page. your yeah. Just remember that because a poem is about baseball doesn't mean it's actually about baseball. Yeah, um, that is true. That's maybe good advice. That things can be about many things that they aren't about on face value. But when you're not sure, that's where you come back to this stream and we talk about, digging into poems and analyzing them and understanding them on that level. Hi, Maytari. Threads also has a decent poetry community when they aren't being all gatekeepy. Yeah, um, it's hard. It's hard to find communities, poetic communities online. Um, Luckily, you found one on Twitch that I think is not very gatekeepy. I try to be anti gatekeepy, right? Um, where, you know, yeah, gatekeepy bad. um, yeah, there's so many, and if you ever see someone, I think this is good advice. If you ever see someone like as a blanket statement saying that like some author is a bad poet, um, try to avoid those spaces, try to avoid those people. I think that's a really unpleasant way to look at art and artists, and usually is very spiteful and disingenuous. So, yeah, that's maybe the big piece of advice is to just be open to new things and to reading different stuff and to like having your views on what is poetry and what can be poetry, having that be challenged, right? I got sick of being around a streamer I mod for who advocates for generative AI. So I'm here now. What are we talking about? We are talking about, I mean, uh, sort of how to approach getting into poetry or reading poetry, but I guess also gatekeeping, right? Um, and the fact that a lot of people in online spaces will try to tell you that something that you wrote or that something that someone else wrote isn't poetry or isn't poetry enough or is wrong. And I think those people suck. Maybe they don't suck as people, but the action that they're taking in that moment is a very sucky one and they should stop. and we should not follow in their footsteps. Um, you see someone hate something, don't just hate it because they hate it. Um, Go read that poet and decide for yourself. And if you don't like it, that's fine, right? Um, but I think poetic, for all their free expression, I think a lot of poets get pretty groupthinky sometimes. So there's that. I'm EP, so I'm gonna go nap. Yes, definitely nap. Take care of your body and mind. And yeah, thank you. I haven't experienced that myself for poetry because I mainly post my fan illustrations on socials, not my original poetry. Yeah, and that's good, right? It's good that you've not experienced that directly. I don't think I so much have, um, at least like directed at my work. But then again, I haven't gotten too much into the improvised poetry and improvised music thing that I'm, working on. And I think the more that I do that, the more I might start to find people who discard it, right? And that's okay. People can say whatever they want, and it doesn't really bother me, right? Um, if someone tells me that my art isn't valid, that's just a reflection on them and their narrow mind and worldview. And you know, I that's usually how I frame things. If someone's being an asshole, like right, that's on them. Uh, it's not necessarily my responsibility to like fix them or to and I definitely shouldn't get mad at them because that's just useless, right? One of my posts was, how do you tell you're a poet? You wrote something and called it a poem. It got some hate. Yeah. Like why do people have to hate on that? um yeah, I think that's a pretty good um way to define a poet, right? Someone who wrote something and called it a poem. That's pretty much the definition I've come to as well. So, yeah. I think that's it for stream. I think it is just going to be a short stream today, and I'm going to end it in the next few minutes before the ad break hits. The most bonkers take I got was that you have to write in metaphor. Oh, if you have to write in metaphor, you don't know how to write poetry. Oh, that's as crazy, right? Either way, if you have to write a metaphor, you don't know how to write. Yeah, I mean, that's just people projecting their preferences. That's just them saying, "Oh, I don't like writing metaphors." So then, like, if you don't, it's not poetry, and that's just such a judgmental frame and just such a really shitty and sad way to see the world. So don't do that, right? Don't be that person. I don't think any of you are that person though, so not too much of an issue. Okay, thanks for watching. I've been Imogen. You've been watching me talking about poetry, and thank you, Classics or Ace, for submitting that very nice poem earlier. Um, and next stream is on Wednesday. Hopefully, I will have gotten better sleep. I didn't get bad sleep last night. Um, like I slept like 7.5 hours, but hopefully it'll be better. Hopefully I'll have more energy. And yeah, until then, keep making art you love and calling it whatever you want to call it, right? And keep finding beauty in the world wherever it is you find it. And don't be letting anyone else tell you that those are wrong. Bye.